No, this idea of oracles is actually something that it was actually his PhD thesis was his most obscure piece of work. It was called Systems of Logic Based on Ordinals, and in fact it was kind of a funny thing because Turing machines, he introduced in 1936, he'd shown that one universal Turing machine was capable of doing the same computation as any other Turing machine.
Right.
You could take that one universal machine and you could, by feeding in different input, you could get it to emulate any other Turing machine. Actually, I have to say, just to add a sort of personal note to that history, I finally figured out what the very simplest possible universal Turing machine could be, and I put up this prize for could somebody prove it, and somebody did in 2007. So we know what the very simplest possible universal Turing machine is. But his idea was that you can have this sort of idealized machine, you can have just one machine, and then you can, by changing how you program it, you can get it to emulate any other machine. He didn't know how universal the universal Turing machine would be. He thought, for example, that physics would be different from that. He thought his universal Turing machine might emulate the way that, like, people do computations or something, but he didn't think it was necessarily the way the universe works.
Yeah.
What became clear and was a big surprise is that different ways of thinking about what might be the basis of computation all turned out to be equivalent. And then basically in the 1980s, partly through my efforts actually, people began to understand that maybe what had been discovered as this mathematical idealization in Turing machines might apply to physics as well.
Yeah.
But then Turing, in a rather bizarre kind of, people never really often never believe the paradigms they build. And so Turing really was thinking about this idea of an oracle, which would be a thing that could do problems that a Turing machine couldn't do.
That's like Wolfram
Alpha.
Alpha.
What he wrote his What's that?
That's like Wolfram Alpha doing problems that ChatGPT can't do.
Well, yes, except that Alan Turing, in his way of thinking about this, I mean, just to, he was talking about, a Turing machine, for example, can't predict. If you say, what will this Turing machine eventually do even after an infinite time? A Turing machine can't in finite time in general predict that. Yeah. He said, well, imagine that you have this oracle that could predict it. And he wasn't thinking of people. He was thinking of some kind of mathematical idealization. Kurt Gödel, on the other hand, did think that would be about people. Gödel's theorem about mathematics and incompleteness of mathematics.
What do you think about that?
So that's an equivalent story to universal computation and Turing machines and so on. Kurt Gödel really was, he had this belief that human minds kind of go further than any of these kinds of formal systems. And that was sort of his feeling. I think that the real thing that he was trying to show, and this gets a bit more abstract, is this kind of Platonic view of mathematics, that there's a question of, is mathematics something you just construct? You just say, I've got these axioms, now I'm going to sort of build this structure based on these axioms, or is there a real there to mathematics that we are merely discovering? That there's an intrinsic nature to mathematics that we're merely discovering pieces of. And that was a thing which in the early part of the 20th century there'd been much debate about. And Gödel was very much on the side of, there is a real thing to mathematics. It's not just an arbitrary construct of human minds. And in fact, on that point of what Gödel thought about that, I very firmly agree, although it's kind of a slightly long story, how that emerges from ideas that have come out of our physics project. Yeah. But the real kind of the soundbite about that is, if you believe the physical universe exists, which is probably a reasonable thing for us to believe, then we have to believe that mathematics in the same sense kind of exists, and that Gödel was really right about that. But Gödel none of these people knew at the time what, they'd made these simple idealized models. They didn't know how accurate they would be about brains. And I think that the question is, when we have brains and we've got our 100 billion neurons in our brains, and they're connected in all these ways, and they have all these electrical signals that are being produced and so on, what aspects of that actually matter? if you want to do brain-like things. It's kind of like you have a bird. A bird has feathers. A bird has, flapping wings and so on. Which aspects of that matter if you want to fly? And it turns out the fact that you have wings seems to matter. Well, unless you're a drone of some kind. But there's some things that matter, but other things don't. Feathers don't matter. We don't have feathered airplanes.
So going back,
and so this
Stephen,
question of what matters in brains is a science question, basically. And what I think we're learning is that for purposes of generating language, what matters isn't the details of the fact that our neurons consume glucose and things like this.
Yeah.
It's the overall architecture of brains.
So,
And, to the question of whether, what a ChatGPT can do versus what it can't do, I think that what brains do quickly is a good model for what it can do. In other words, the things that we can do, the details of how our neural network in our brains works as compared to the neural net that's in ChatGPT, we don't know how that corresponds. We don't know how close that is. People in neuroscience had believed that these artificial neural nets were actually pretty far away from the way that biological ones work. Although having seen what the artificial ones can do, it's been realized that they're actually closer to the biological ones we thought.
So if we gave them
it's actually very much.
Stephen, so if we gave them a quadrillion parameters, these neural nets, gave them a quadrillion, would that yield AGI?
Well, I think we have to define what we mean by AGI. I think the thing to understand is the task that they're doing, which is complete this piece of text, is a very definite task. It's a task that's very, very important for us humans. It's very relevant for us humans. It's not the only thing you can do. I mean, basically, the thing that it denies is kind of the formalization of the world. It denies kind of all of modern science. It's like what the unaided human can do, it has a chance to do. But we humans have invented these methods like computation, like mathematics and so on, that allow us to formalize things and allow things to be done that are beyond what we can just sort of run in our brains. And that, that's not what ChatGPT does. ChatGPT is this thing that emulates the kind of linguistic aspects of sort of knitting words together, and we can discuss how it manages to do that.
By collecting vast quantities of statistics, which is a radically different way from the way human brains master language. I think it's...
I don't think we know that.
We don't get a trillion internet data points to generate the next word in the sentence that we may use. It has.
So, but GPT told me that 2 + 2 = 5, and
it will do all kinds of crazy things, right? So I mean, look. First point is, in terms of the amount of experience that exists in the training. We talked about neural nets and sort of this idea of training neural nets is about, can we make all these weights? Can we tweak them so that the answers will agree with kind of what would be typical of like documents on the web? So for example, when we were first training image recognition networks, after the sort of big advance that was made, we were training some back in 2013, 2012 or so. And I was kind of curious, how does the number of training samples that we had compare to the number of different images that a child sees in the first couple of years of life? And we had, I think, 20 million training images. And that's kind of comparable to what a typical kid sees in the first, couple of years of life. So in that particular case, it was sort of comparable. I think in the case of ChatGPT, well, I know, I personally have put 50 million words out there into the world. Okay, so 50 million words. The total training corpus is around 1 trillion words now. So my 50 million words is just kind of a drop in the bucket. I probably heard a lot more than 50 million words. But yes, it's not quite the same number. And in fact, I think it's probably true that the hardware in our brains, there's probably some hardware which is maybe better suited to human language than what we yet know how to build with ChatGPT. There's some even hardware aspects where we kind of know it's inefficient in what it's doing relative. I mean, okay, brains, for example, here's a very basic thing. In a computer, you know, there's memory and there's CPU, and most of the time the memory is doing nothing. And most of the time it's just sitting there, you know, storing data. And, you know, that's what's happening with ChatGPT. Most of the time, the network, which is, you know, stored in memory, is not changing. In our brains, the neurons are both being used to actually compute the next word, so to speak, and being used and being able to learn continuously. Yeah. That's something we don't yet have hardware that does, but we probably will have. But, you know, so I think that's but let's see, we were talking about, Bob was asking about the quadrillion parameter, you know, GPT system and what will it do? And I think well, first of all, we're really at the edge of the training data that we humans have put out there. I mean, we put, you know, maybe 10 billion web pages that are somewhat sensible. If you look at like the biggest collections, the archive collections of the web, maybe a couple of hundred billion pages. Nobody even knows how repetitive those are. But that's what we humans have put out there. We put out there a lot of video and things like that as well. But that's kind of the corpus of human kind of language that these systems can learn from. In terms of, so, you know, it doesn't do much good to have lots more weights, lots more neurons if you don't have more to train on. And I think the thing that you might ask is, well, could it be the case that this quadrillion, you know, neural net has another qualitatively new kind of ability to do things beyond what we see in the existing LLMs? I have to say I'm not optimistic about that. I think that I think what we've seen is the big jump in terms of language capability. We'll see another jump when video capability becomes sort of gets into the picture. But I think we've seen that big jump. Now, when you talk about AGI, it's a muddy word, a muddy term, I think, because it's kind of like you say, okay, Bob certainly knows that in the history of kind of the last, I don't know, I've only seen it for 50 years, but he's seen it for more than that. You know, what people mean by AI, whenever there's stuff computers can't do and humans can more or less do, that's in the AI bucket. When we can do that, we know we have AI. And so people have said that about, or even doing mathematical computation. People said that's you know, when we can do that, we'll know we have AI. And then progressively, each of these things that is like, oh, only humans can do that. To do that, you know, if we could do that, we really know we had AI.
So what do you hope?
It keeps on getting done by essentially pure engineering.